You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everybody, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz. And before I introduce today's very special guest, I want to mention that I've had listeners ask me how they can help support the show in various ways. And so I've joined Patreon, which now allows you to help financially support The Wedding Biz to continue to put out educational and inspirational interviews. You can easily contribute just $6 a month or more if you'd like by going to theweddingbiz.com, where you will see a link to contribute. Again, that's theweddingbiz.com. Also, I recently announced the launch of the Wedding Biz Network, in which I'm producing podcasts for people who have previously been guests on the Wedding Biz in order to ensure the highest quality network hosts and content. And the first show to be hosted on the Wedding Biz Network is Sean Lowe, whose show is called The Business of Being Creative. Sean brings a wealth of education, inspiration, and relevant advice for all of us in the event industry and those who have creative businesses outside of the event industry. You can find it on your cell phone's podcast app. And again, it's called The Business of Being Creative, or you can go to theweddingbiznetwork.com, theweddingbiznetwork.com. And soon I'll be announcing more dynamic hosts. So if you missed last week's episodes, there were 3 amazing ones. First of all, on last Monday, Australia's premier weddings and event planner and designer, Diane Khoury. And on Wednesday's episode of The Next Level, my guest co-host was John Emanuel, Australia's premier floral designer. And then on Friday, I released a bonus episode, very special one, talking about race relations with Preston Bailey. It was a fantastic conversation. And so today's guest is Kathi Sharpe-Ross, who wrote the book, Reinvent Your Life. What are you waiting for? And obviously, so many of us are facing just one of the absolute biggest challenges of our lives. And given that I have a music and entertainment company that is just totally stalled, I myself have faced the question of how do I reinvent myself or add some other dimension to what I do overall. And that is what led directly to the launch of the Wedding Biz Network and a new podcast I have called The Music Makers. So reinventing ourselves is not just some simple, easy task. And we all can use help with how to think about this topic for our own lives. So Kathi and her book, Reinvent Your Life, is a tremendous help and resource. And during this interview, she gives specific ideas for how to move forward and reimagine our lives and careers. So enjoy my conversation with Kathi Sharpe-Ross. Kathi, you are the author of Reinvent Your Life, What Are You Waiting For?, which happened to come out literally days or a week before the country shut down. And so reinvention really is one of the hottest topics right now, isn't it?
It sure is. It's really uncanny, Andy, to be having a conversation about something that is literally on the 11 o'clock news every day, to be talking about reinventing and pivoting, and everybody's being forced to kind of really explore how to get through this period. And sure, when you decide 10 years ago you're going to write a book about reinventing your life, you certainly don't expect this to be the period in which you end up marketing your book. So I had to reinvent my entire book launch plan as my book came out on March 7th, ironically.
Incredible. Well, I think it's in the preface where I read, you wrote, reinvention is a personal intervention with yourself. And I mean, Kathi, I love how you're framing it, that it is a personal intervention, isn't it?
It really is. And I love that you've pulled that quote out. It's such an important thing that we learn how to listen to ourselves and acknowledge when something could use a little tweak. And I say it in those very cautious words because reinvention does not have to be associated with a massive overhaul of one's life. It might be something as simple as learning a new language or picking up a new hobby or having a renewed sense of spirit and spirituality. So there are minor things that we can do to tweak our lives that create an entire catalyst for who we are and how we live our lives. Some people will go for something big, but
yeah, absolutely. And you also talk about it's really changing mindset, essentially, isn't it? Reframing. I think somewhere in there you also said reframing the brain. I mean, that is what it is.
yeah. And look, that's easier said than done. It sounds good when you're sitting in a place where you're comfortable with what you do and you may be financially comfortable and you may be content with the life around you. But when you are in a challenging place in your life, whatever the circumstances, it's a little harder to think about how easy it is to reframe your point of view. And I do talk about that. I talk about how we can put on a pair of rose-colored glasses and try for just a moment to see the challenge, that experience in our life, that interaction with someone, that job that we're living in through a different lens, and try to change the circumstances. And sometimes that alone will pull you into a new way of dealing with it. So it may not appear forever at first, but if you just are open-minded enough to know that there is another way, and more importantly, that you're entitled, because that is one of the big challenges. A lot of people feel that they're not entitled to do that, to have that, to experience that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the first step. And I want to go through your book with certain moments of certain chapters here in today's conversation. So in chapter 2, related to this, the aha moment. And I love how you title it the aha moment. That's perfect. You say that the process of self-discovery or rediscovery is really invaluable, should never be rushed. And there's a quote here by Alexander Graham Bell that you point out, which I love. And I've heard it. It's in songs like a Bob Marley song. When one door closes, another door opens. But we so often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see the ones which open for us. That, to me, seems to be the essence of this. Got to open our minds, like you were saying.
Yeah. And I think, that comes with listening. And there's a lot of noise in our lives. There's a lot of noise around us. Some is external negative noise. Some of it is the internal voice that is negative, that stops us or challenges us or doesn't feed us with the possibility. And it starts with really allowing ourselves to listen a little more to what we want, to being aware. And, when I talk about aha moments, those can come in the smallest, slightest ways. You could be driving down a highway and see a billboard and the image just makes you go, that's cool. Or you turn on the radio and you hear a song. It may be a song from, 30 years ago in your life that reminds you of a moment in time. You may taste something and those taste buds just evoke some kind of a reaction. Or you'll be talking to a friend and they share something and you think, God, I wish I could do that. Or I wish I had that. Or I wish I was experiencing that too. Those are aha moments that you may not realize how valuable they actually are. Mm-hmm. But when you start to become more self-aware and tuning into yourself a little more, you actually start to realize that those little aha moments could lead to something that you may want to do to create a better way of living in your life.
Well, and you're talking about self-care too, which is in your next chapter, feeding the soul. And you say, it's okay to nurture your decadent, ridiculous, childish whims. When we let our dreams go, we let part of ourselves go with them. So, I understand you're also talking about with those moments, those aha moments, is rediscovering that part within us that I think we hold down a great degree.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us get caught up in the important lives that we have, being family, friends, work, career, hobbies, everything that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we negate that self-care, that personal piece of our lives. Ironically, I think people have become more aware of that in the last 9 weeks because we've had the benefit of a little more time on our hands. We've had to sort of change our lifestyle at the flip of a switch. And for some people, it's been an opportunity to sort of say, okay, well, if I'm going to be stuck in the house, I'm going to take on an art project, or I'm going to sit on the floor and do yoga for 20 minutes that I wasn't having time to do because I was running around, and finding ways to do that. So I think it's really important that we do really look at the self-care piece and try to give that a much greater importance. But you look at someone who's a lawyer sitting in their office miserable after 25 years, sitting in that corner office, no less, maybe with some very cushy, fabulous job, if it's that extent. But you ask them what they wanted to do when they were 15 years old, and they'll tell you, I wanted to be a rock star. Well, they're not going to be the next Mick Jagger.
Right.
But what if they went out, bought a guitar secondhand, went on YouTube, took lessons, and got the other guys down the hall, the guys and gals that wanted to sort of have a little soul nurturing in their lives, and put a rock band, a garage band together on a Saturday afternoon? They'd probably come to work with a bit of a skip in their step on Monday.
That's right. But what would you say, though, about the challenge that a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people are facing right now with having to work out of a house with their spouse there or partner or kids, et cetera? It's for some people, I would think it's hard to find that space.
Yeah. And I think, look, if you're in a relationship or an environment or a situation with other adults around and you have the ability to say, I need a timeout, and I'm a mom, my kids are growing up, but I remember the first time I looked at my kids when they were little and they were old enough to understand when mommy said, kids, mommy needs a timeout. And
Right.
they're like, wait, we're the ones that usually get timeouts.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
But the whole notion of being the adult that says, I need a timeout, it may be 10 minutes. But my goodness, don't say I can never have a timeout, because we can all have 10 minutes. We do it to get in the shower. We do it when it's time to cook dinner. Or maybe while you're cooking dinner, you put on a podcast that listen to something of inspiration. Or you say, whoever's in charge, I'm back in 10 minutes. So unless you're in a position where you really cannot leave the house, that's understandable. You need to just know that it's okay and you're entitled. I remember talking to a friend years ago who was dealing with the children, a mother who was not well, and she was just, dying for a little me time. And I just had to remind her that she was entitled.
That's right.
To figure it out, to find a friend, a cousin, a neighbor, a relative, and say, I need 30 minutes twice a week. Because just the fact that you're taking some control, it's not even at that point about the 30 minutes 2 times a week. It's the fact that you just realized that you could create that for yourself by feeling entitled, finding a solution, and acting on that. So it might be that small, but to know that you are capable of creating something for yourself sometimes is half the battle.
Well, and I like how you're also framing it in terms of being entitled, because I think there's a bit of a struggle at this time, whether we've got issues with finances or, again, homeschooling kids, all these different issues. Like, we're not allowed to feel joy in the middle of this pandemic, and I would say, why punish ourselves? I mean, there's the difficult time, but we've got to also, again, nurture ourselves. And again, I love that the word entitlement to having this for ourselves.
And typically entitlement sounds like a very obnoxious, negative associated word. And in this case, and I talk a lot about this in the book, self-care, being selfish can be good. It can actually end up being very good for everyone around you. Because if you can take those deep breaths and you can feel a little in control in some part of your life, that will spill over into everything else you have to do just a little bit better.
It's interesting. I have just a little piece of my own story with this. I took half a Friday off about a month ago. It's in the middle of all this. And here I am needing to deal with finances and all these other issues. And same thing that we're talking about. I felt I needed to give myself a chunk of time. And I went for a hike, like many, many hours. During that hike, when I could finally let go and reconnect with nature and myself, I got an epiphany, several epiphanies that led to a huge change with the podcast side of my business. If it weren't, I don't know if I hadn't had that day, but also, coming back to the overall concept of reinvention, there's also a natural fear that many of us can have about facing this, about facing the issue of reinventing ourselves. And, you have a wonderful quote in one of the chapters by Winston Churchill: fear is a reaction, courage is a decision. So any tips on how to get up that courage to let go of the fear of going after this huge thing of reinventing ourselves? How do you do that?
Look, it's baby steps, and it's easier said than done. And, it wouldn't be fair for me to say, oh, no big deal. I think we all experience fear in a lot of different ways, but we have the power. And I think it starts with knowing, the conscious knowing that we have the power to manage it, that fear comes from thoughts and the words that we feed into our thoughts. And we are capable of reframing it. There are a lot of tools and a lot of exercises. As a matter of fact, I just interviewed Beth Comstock, who is the former chairwoman of GE, who wrote an incredible book about fear and courage. And, we talked a lot about this. And it's about the baby steps. It's about putting yourself through a series of small experiences to validate the control and the power that you do have to manage it. Because the fear, when you really kind of look at what is the greatest thing that you're fearful of at the end of the day and what's paralyzing you from making a decision or moving towards something that you know that you want, but you're fearful of the change. If you take those baby steps and you realize that that first step was manageable, and you can pat yourself on the back for having the courage to have taken it. And then you take the next one. So you break it down into little bite-sized, snack-sized pieces and take on each component one at a time. I mean, I was lucky. I grew up traveling and living around the world. My parents were entrepreneurial and spiritual, and I think I was given some great tools to look at life through. But if you speak to one of my siblings, you'll kind of get a different perspective on that.
Yeah.
But for me, change and moving around was an adventure. And, I sort of grew up with a perspective of change and new things and how fun they were. And I was curious and still am. If my husband came in today and said, honey, we're moving to such and such country, I'd say, what time does the plane leave? I'll figure all the rest out. And I've always had that sort of, fascination with change and new things and the excitement that comes with it and the exploration. But there are different versions of fear and then different parts of our life where fear creeps in. And I think we have to know how to break it down and start to understand what part of that entire process or that entire experience is what we are fearing the most and why. And start to put a plan together that is in bite-sized pieces to move towards it and tackle it slowly.
Maybe a first step is what we talked about earlier, which is just simply giving ourselves some space, some time to go dream again, to explore.
Exactly. There's a chapter, as you know, that says, hello, are you still in there?
That's right.
And that's probably one of my favorite titles of a chapter because it is such an important moment, as you just raised it, to just allow ourselves to reconnect. We get so lost in, this game of life.
Yeah.
And, we've all had a very rude awakening that, there is no such thing as certainty. And, we've had a bit of, I feel like someone's taken the whole world and shaken it up a little bit and said, wake up. What are you going to do now with this one wonderful life of yours? So, talk about being handed a little silver lining in there somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, in spite of, some of the challenges that various of us are dealing with,
of course,
the opportunity though, there really are gifts here. And again, I think, it's fine to, in the middle of this, to have joy and give that to ourselves. What about, another chapter that I really like that you talked about was habits and kind of changing. You have, and throughout the book, I want to let people know there are wonderful tools. This isn't just something to read and then you kind of forget. There are many, many tools and exercises, which I think are very helpful. So one of them is a change your routine exercise. And, again, you've got another quote in here by Winston Churchill that I love. It's a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. Right. I love that. I've talked about that so much on this podcast in different respects, like embracing obstacles. There's that book by Ryan Holiday. And so in terms of habits and changing your routines, and if you could give us some thoughts about that.
Absolutely. There are some incredible, most of us have habits and habits can be really great, but the notion of changing up some of the routines in our lives is such a subtle way to start to create some of these aha moments or those walking in the mountain reflection moments. And it might be something as subtle as reaching into the back of your closet and putting on a shirt or a tie that you haven't worn in years, or shoes that are sitting there in the back of the closet that you used to love and they're now in the back, and you put them on and you're like, wow, how fun. And you just kind of like have this new smile on your face today instead of the same old, same old.
That's right.
Or you may, think about how many of us stop at a Starbucks on the way to the office or on the way to wherever we're going. What if you took a different route?
Right.
And stop at a different Starbucks.
That's simple.
And see different baristas and see different people in there. Or order an iced tea instead of an iced coffee. And, if you're not into a big change because it may be just a little overwhelming, what about the little things like that? What about trying on just some other habit that forces you to get out of your day-to-day norm and your mindset and just kind of opens you up to a little, wow, that was fun. Oh, that was interesting. You see something different on the way to that other Starbucks, or drive to work on a different route. Find another way to go. See what you see. Maybe there'll be a tree or flowers at the stoplight, or, a beautiful vehicle or a billboard that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. You just start to be more aware of the world around you. So those are the little things that we can do to sort of change our everyday environment that could create aha moments.
Yeah.
But be aware of them.
Yeah, I agree that. You also talk about the issue of time, having the time and meeting that resistance. Now, I know, again, that you wrote this before the pandemic hit, and here we are now. There is time. I mean, even for those of us who are working hard to get through this, still, maybe we're not having to commute like we do, and we're saving hours with that. And instead of working out at a gym, we're at home, we're saving time there. And so now really is the time. We may never have this amount of time again. However, for most of my audience in the event industry, this whole issue of reinvention and taking that time, the event industry in particular is just getting crushed, right now. And so in a sense, we're being forced into this. So many of my friends and colleagues talk about a pressure that we feel to reinvent ourselves and to pivot now. To do it now. And so there's this pressure to do it quickly and get something moving, whether it's for finances or for whatever else it is. What would you say about that?
Well, I think first going back to the matter of time, it is such a precious commodity, and how we use it and how we define our lives with time is really important. I would say on a personal level, I think if we all were to take out a piece of paper, which I encourage in one of my power tools, we have 26 power tools in this book, that encourage you to really take pen to paper, literally. And I kind of remind people throughout the book to actually, no author will hear it. You'll never see an author say, put this book down.
Yeah, right.
But I say it several times
put it
because the value proposition is to do a bit of the work. And it's to do these exercises and to really sit there documenting and being accountable for the thoughts that you're having or would like to be having to create some of that reinvention. And one of them is to take one column and document how you're spending your time and what you value. Document what you value. And then on the other column, document the time that you are spending on any of the things that you value and where you're not spending your time on the things that you value. And when you start to look at those two columns side by side, you'd be shocked at how misaligned your values and the time you're spending are with one another, which says a lot right there, right? I think that when we look at the amount of time, as we've both suggested, that we've had, that's been handed to us because of this horrible pandemic situation, you're right. We aren't commuting. We're not going to the gym. I'm not going out for drinks or after dinner, after work meetings at 6:00, before I come home to make dinner or have a dinner meeting. There's so many hours in my life that I've gotten back. And, I think for the most part, even if we are juggling the homeschooling and all these other things that we're having to sort out, looking at this precious commodity of time and figuring out what we could be doing with it is really, I mean, I can tell you, and I'm sure you've seen this, people have said, I have a book in me. I want to be a writer. I've never had a chance to actually spend the time. I'm being forced to stay home. I can't do this, that, and the other. So I'm going to use that time. I'm going to start an art project. I'm going to build something in my backyard. I mean, we're seeing all of this. So now that the world may be returning to some sort of, new version of itself, whatever that means in the coming months, some of us, I think, are going, wait, I'm not done yet.
Right.
I'm not ready. I feel this way when I get on an airplane sometimes. I fly to New York usually every 3 weeks. And I cherish the 5-6 hours on a plane.
That's
and
right.
It used to be that I really cherished it before there was Wi-Fi on a plane.
That's right. Me
because
too.
For 5 or 6 hours, I think I did my best book writing on the plane. I could read a book. I could watch a movie. And these things don't fit into my lifestyle otherwise. I run a big global marketing agency. I have clients and staff and a family and all these other things. And so I used to cherish that. And we'd start to land. I'd go like, no, I'm not ready to get off this airplane.
I relate to this. I completely resonate.
Right? So I'm kind of feeling that way now, going, wait, what about all the things I said I was going to do? I mean, these 2 jigsaw puzzles that are sitting here next to me on the floor, didn't get those done. But that's where we have to learn. And maybe that's one of the first steps, is how to carve out a little time, how to put an appointment on our own calendars, as you might with a client or a business meeting, to schedule time with yourself. Put it on your own calendar. And I used to do that for the writing of a book and creating a website and all the content and everything. And I literally had to put that on a schedule. It wouldn't get done by itself otherwise.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I also think about, as I don't think things will really be kicking in for a while, until there's basically some kind of a vaccine. But in the meantime, yeah, it's interesting. And in the event industry, we're waiting to see how does it manifest. I mean, there's these, I think, arbitrary rules of if you have an event in September, you can't have more than 50 people. Well, this is all relative to the size of the building, the airflow, all of that, but something's going to be coming about. And even, as much as I, absolutely want this to happen and to also bring back some cash flow, I feel like I'm going to miss an aspect of this time right now, like you're talking about. I mean, a jigsaw puzzle, my God, how wonderful.
I know. I was so excited. I have 2 of them. I was like, who's got time for that?
Yeah, it's really, well, and this leads us into another chapter of yours, chapter 12, Life Matters. And again, I love these quotes, which you have there for a reason. This one by Eleanor Roosevelt. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die, and the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. And that's what we're talking about here too, right? Even the choice to retain some of what we've learned during this time.
Yeah, and I hope we see that. I think that everybody has been so optimistic, scared, and freaked out. But as soon as that sort of initial emotion started to pass, and I think all the humorous emails and texts and gifts and everything that was circulating helped us all keep a little levity. But then everybody started to settle into a place of, so what am I going to do with my time? Yeah. And how am I going to? And I really hope that the humanity, the optimism, the sense of self, the sense of self-care and staying healthy, which frankly is the most important thing we could do for ourselves in light of this, is to stay our best, healthiest self. I do hope that people really don't sort of go, oh my God, we're free, we're out again, and let's forget all that, it's over. No, it's not. Right. And we all know there could be the daunting notion of a second wave. So all the more reason to figure out how to reinvent our lives. No pun intended, but in a way that is in accordance with being cautious and mindful and not selfish, and in a more self-caring manner, and really, finding ways to live our lives in a way that makes us happy. Because we've also been very much confronted with over close to 100,000 deaths now in this country of how precious life is. What a reminder.
Yeah. Well, this leads beautifully to another point that you make. It's in chapter 15, the tipping point, and you say flowers really do rise after the rain, and most of the time they are even more beautiful and resilient than before the storm began. How apropos, you know? And you talk about, what about the fear of failure? Failure, a lot of us, not just the event business, but in the event industry, there are people really struggling right now and very scared of losing what they have, but also going after this reinvention. What if some new idea that we have, a new business idea, doesn't work out? And you mentioned your failure can be your biggest success. Could you talk about what you meant by that?
Absolutely. Failure can be, with the right tools and the right perspective, can be the rocket fuel for success. There's an old saying in the sales business that every no is closer to a yes. There is no question, and we tend to do this around my agency because we're in the partnership business. We put a lot of programs together and bring and connect, like corporate matchmakers, bringing brands and events together and doing sponsorship and strategic partnerships. And when someone says, I'm sorry, it's not for us, because we've thought it's a brilliant idea for them and they'd make a great partner for this film festival or this global conference or whatever this event is, and they say it's not for us. And there could be a million reasons. They've got their own philanthropy. They've got their own events already on the schedule. They don't have the budget this year. There's always a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. And, it's quite the long shot when you reach out to someone with a great idea that they're going to be sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for that phone call. Mm. So you got to know going in that that's the case. But when they say no, you go, okay, great. Well, now I understand your business better. I know what your priorities are. I appreciate that. And there may be something else I'm working on that I will bring back to you in the future. Mm-hmm. You formed a relationship. It's a positive outcome. It's not going to work for that particular partner that you brought to them. But the ability to look at from the perspective of the value proposition in that conversation, and more importantly, cross them off the list and move on.
Yeah.
and not dwell on it, and know that they're there now on another piece of paper, sidelined for some other conversation sometime. But it keeps you refocused. I have a very dear friend. There's actually a story about her in the book. Was a real power player in the entertainment business, the big agency, brokering deals every day. And she had an opportunity to step back from the company and kind of really rethink where she was at in her life. And she'd always had this sort of back pocket dream. And she decided to pursue it. And after about a year and a half, she came full circle and said, you know what? I did it. I came, I conquered. Yeah. I'm over it. I'm done. And I'm going back to what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I thought that is brilliant. It was a year and a half of discovery. Mm. And she may not have failed at creating the business, but in a way that could be perceived as the dream failing, right? Like this was not going to be the thing she was going to do for the next 25 years or, till whenever. For her, it was a realization. And I think we have to recognize that everything happens for a reason. And maybe it isn't failure. And we may be mislabeling the things that happen when there is a bump in the road or things don't go the way we thought they had. And allow ourselves the grace to say, well, it's not what I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to pivot. Or something new came up or a challenge came along that I wasn't expecting. I have a friend who just opened a business in January on the East Coast in the recycling, reusing, refilling environmental space, gorgeous retail concept. And she opened her doors at the beginning of January. And clearly it's been a challenging several months for her, but she pivoted and said, I'm going to do face masks. I'm going to bring in hand sanitizer. I'm going to make myself relevant to the community. Mm. And she's managed to maintain not only a lovely business, but build a community that is so grateful.
Wow.
For what she's offering. So she chose to not become a victim of the situation, mm-hmm. but rather lean into it and build on it. And maybe when things start to calm down and people can go out again, her business will flourish, but that community will not forget that she was there for them.
Right.
At a time they needed it. So sometimes we do have to reframe even that notion of failure And if it's true blown failure because something just didn't work, how do we pick ourselves up? You look at someone like Diana Nyad, the famous swimmer who swam from Cuba to Florida, made headline news years ago. She was actually just a guest on our Reinvention virtual chat series on Saturday. And we were talking about this notion of failure. And this is someone who, after her fourth attempt to swim from Cuba to Florida, on that fifth attempt, she did it.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even want to try it after the second time, let alone a third and a fourth, and then on the fifth she did. So this notion of never giving up, if you really, really want something, to find a way to surround yourself with the people, the time, the resources, mentors, whatever that is, if you really want something, you'll find your way through it.
Well, and I've heard so many interviews of people or groups of people who have great success with whatever it is, what kind of company or entertainment, whatever it is. Every one of them talks about how there are far more quote unquote failures, which is why I don't even believe in that word. You know, it's like you said, maybe it's a bump in the road that helps us get to that success. Without these, again, supposed failures, there's no way we would be successful. So I don't even see them as failures.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to see moments like that as a challenge. It's like, oh, yeah, really?
Right.
I'll show you.
Right.
Or even if it's an inanimate object, it's those moments that challenge us to rise to the occasion and to see what grit we have as we're all experiencing now. You know, there's a lot of value in being able to frame it up that way for ourselves and really truly believe that.
Yeah. Well, I want to urge everybody to get this book, Reinvent Your Life. What are you waiting for? Step-by-step process with wonderful exercises to help find your way to reinventing yourself. So urge you all to look for this by Kathi Sharpe-Ross. Kathi, before we go, is there anything else? I mean, we got into so much, and yet it's just the tip of the iceberg of what you have to offer. Any other statements or suggestions for tools?
I appreciate that. There are, I think the big things that we've touched on of listening to yourself is critical. Really trusting in your inner voice, being aware of those aha moments and those little epiphanies and those big epiphanies, to be accountable to yourself. Really write things down on a piece of paper, make a list, touch it every day in some way, whether it's a thought, reaching out to a mentor, making a list of things you want to do. Mm-hmm. It's really important that you do feel self-entitled and that you have a dose of courage to take on something new, even if it's baby steps. It's super important to reward yourself along the way on each step. And one thing we didn't really touch on was the reinvention roadmap, that as you're writing things down, think of it as your roadmap. The ability to jot things down. It can be spreadsheets and flowcharts, whatever type of person you are. But to create that roadmap, and if you think about it, when you get in your car and you want to go somewhere that you've never been, and you put in that address into the GPS or the Waze or whatever that system is, it's telling the car, go left here. It's telling you, frankly, go left here, go 2 miles, make a right turn, then make a left. Well, think of your own reinvention roadmap in that same way. If you don't put that destination in, how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
And if you do, you are going to have the roadmap. And the greatest thing is, guess what? This is your roadmap. This is your reinvention. This is your notion of what you want your life to be and what you want to do with it. So it's okay if you get to a certain point in that journey and say, you know what, not so much. Or this came up and now I'm going to pivot. Or I thought I wanted this, but it's not what I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Or I'm going to go mentor in a chocolate shop because I want to open a chocolate store in a few years. You know, and then you go in for a few hours for 3 weekends in a row and you're like, what was I thinking? I'm so not doing that. That's okay. That is not failure. That is discovery. See the difference between those two words?
Yeah, I love that.
Big time.
Yeah.
So that reinvention roadmap and having the grace to allow yourself to pivot and change and do what you want with your life is really important. So those are just a few sort of top line ideas and thoughts. And, we have incredible stories in the book of people from men and women from all walks of life that have been through such monumental experiences. And I think that to me was the most fun thing about writing the book, were all these interviews and all these conversations and the blogs that I've written for the last 10 years for Thrive Global and creating this website, the Reinvention Exchange. It's a community that is about curating the stories and the content that is inspiring a way of thinking and a possibility of what we can do.
Yeah, I love that. And for those of us who might feel too overwhelmed, I mean, when I feel overwhelmed, I need hand-holding. And so this book, the way you've laid it out with the tools, the exercises, it's step-by-step process. I think it's a really good way to, in spite of feeling the fear, in spite of feeling overwhelmed, to really have a nice, it's to be really held by the hands through this very difficult process. I love it. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Kathi Sharpe-Ross. Check out her website, which is sharpealliance.com. That's sharp with an E, alliance.com. And you can find out everything in the show notes at our website of theweddingbiz.com. And be sure to pick up a copy of her book through Amazon and wherever else you like to get your books, called Reinvent Your Life, What Are You Waiting For? And if you enjoyed this episode, and how could you not, would love if you would share it with friends and colleagues who you feel can benefit from it. And also, be sure to subscribe to The Wedding Biz, which is free to do on both your cell phone's podcast app and at theweddingbiz.com, because you'll be notified when a new episode is released, and it can automatically download it if you'd like as well. And that's how you can find out about these bonus episodes that I've been releasing more often, including last Friday's conversation with Preston Bailey. So again, if you could share this particular episode, that would be wonderful. And this Wednesday, in lieu of the typical The Next Level episode, I'm instead going to be releasing just an absolutely fascinating conversation with Colin Cowie. Really wonderful, wonderful episode. And then on Friday, another bonus episode. This one's going to be with Alan Shukovsky, talking about developing new protocols for running events during the pandemic. And finally, if you could follow The Wedding Biz on social media platforms, particularly Instagram at The Wedding Biz, that would be wonderful. And we'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.